We talk different editions of RPGs on today's episode. After 4 long months, several $1,000s, and a trip to Uruguay that I can't take back, we found Charles!
I'm back!
Charles, I don't like, for legal reasons, his company did not kidnap him. I don't like that your company kidnapped you.
Yeah, it was kind of unexpected, so hopefully that won't happen too often. But I had to go away for travel for work. It was fun. It was a good experience, but I'm glad to be back, and I'm really excited about talking about particularly this topic, actually. So let's get started with this, man.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about different editions because a new edition of a very beloved RPG just came out. It's technically not out. It's out if you have certain game stores that are pre-selling it, basically, which is how we were able to get one. Several. We're going to talk about it, and we're going to talk about like what even makes an edition new, like when should an RPG even have a new edition, stuff like that. Is it worth it? All that fun stuff.
That's a fair point. Yeah,
Charles is going to have all those questions, right, Charles?
I will have as many questions as I can muster.
He might have no questions. His brain's still kind of mush.
So we're recording this on a Sunday. I got back Friday at like midnight. So
yeah, I blame Texas.
Blame Texas.
Always.
That's where my family's from. So I love it though. Big heart to Texas.
All right, so let's talk about new editions.
I think what you asked initially was probably a great question. What makes a new edition a new edition? So like what? Because we're going to be talking about Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder. So what makes this edition different than the previous edition?
Money.
Okay, well, there you go. Yeah. Moving to the next question.
No, so, I mean, usually the reason you're going to have a new edition is because there's something with the old edition. There's some problems either with like the core mechanics or something about it that you want to change, but like the theme or like let's be honest, the IP, you want to keep that.
Yeah.
You want to keep it the same while also kind of modifying it and changing some things. And so, for example, older versions of D&D used to have a thing called Armor Class 0. THAC0 hit Armor Class 0. Yeah, where you had to do some really crazy math. Like if this kind of math is hard for you now, that kind of math would have been impossible for you.
Yeah, like so we've talked about how I'm new to tabletop games. Now, I'm not new to Dungeons & Dragons. I've attempted to play it over the span of my life. I was just very immature, I'll be honest, when I first heard of it. And when THAC0 was around, like that was the thing. Just like I was not looking forward to learning how to do. It was just so again, not a math guy. Respectfully, again, I'm sure it was a great system for some people, but for me, I'm like that's too much work for me.
It really was a lot of work, and so like things like that where it's like okay, the crunchiness of it is maybe too much, or even like hey, this mechanic we found is super broken and we needed to change it, but by changing it, we're changing the entire game. That's usually when you have an idea for a new edition. If I had been a better host, I would have actually done research on how long each edition of Dungeons & Dragons has been around for. I think the longest edition before it changed would have been 3.5 or third edition.
Yeah,
which technically went to 3.5. We'll get to why 3.5 is both a separate edition
and an add-on.
Yeah,
an extension of 3.
Right. So since between 3 and 4, I think it was like 15 years, and someone will correct me in the comments. I mean, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, please do.
4th edition had, I think, one of the shorter ones because it was from 2010 to 2015, 2009 to 2010. 2015, they immediately had 5th edition already ready because people did not like 4th edition. In hindsight, a lot of people have come back on 4th edition for some of the mechanics. And honestly, what's even funny is some of the 4th edition things are now in 5th edition.
Okay.
Like the bloody condition is now officially a thing, which I'm assuming is going to be more important when the monster manual comes out, but that's its own thing. And then obviously you get a completely different game like Pathfinder, which wanted to be 3rd edition when they made 4th edition, so they made Pathfinder 1. And again, if you have not had the joy of playing Pathfinder 1, oh my gosh, is that like in a lot of crunchiness to that.
I have not had that luxury yet. So
yeah, when I GM'd Pathfinder, it was like, oh, your character does something broken? I'm just gonna, yeah, sure. I can't double check your work because it's so much.
Yeah.
Like, it was just so many things.
Gotcha.
So when they made Pathfinder 2nd edition, it's a lot better because it streamlined the process, which I think is another reason you would get a new edition, is to streamline some things for sure.
Absolutely. So I guess my question, this is kind of like related to the Pathfinder. So from Pathfinder 1st edition to 2nd edition, did it take a lot more off the GM's plate to because it sounds like you had to do a lot more work in first edition based on, again, I'm basing this off what you just said. Whereas, did it put it back in the player's hands when they get, or put it into the player's hands in the second edition?
I would say it's the opposite.
Okay.
Pathfinder 1 was so focused on your character build that like as a GM I would have to know an insane amount of information just to understand each player character. Like again, the benefits of Pathfinder, even second edition, is the fact that each player, like each character, each one does something different and it feels different, which is great. But then like the rules to that can vary. Like let's put it this way, Brooks played a sorcerer who had a meta magic feat that said anytime you roll damage, you can put it into an equation, and whatever comes out of that equation is actually the amount of damage you do.
Okay.
And because math nerds exist, they were able to find an equation that no matter what you rolled, you always did the max amount of damage you could do. And Brooks is like, "You want me to prove that to you?" And I'm like, "No, I don't. I'm just gonna trust you."
That brings up the whole like, math teacher, show your work.
Yeah, it was insane. And like, I had a guy who played an alchemist who you can drink potions and buff up your physical stats. But again, because it was so much, I just decided not to do it. Turns out he was actually playing it wrong. He was only supposed to buff one stat, and by buffing one stat, you reduce one of your mental stats. He wasn't doing that. He was buffing all three stats. And so that can be the downside. But also, let's be honest, in hindsight, or like, we had fun. We got to play a game. None of us necessarily cared too much.
Yeah.
Me, as the kind of GM who does like to tactically challenge players, can be tough, but I just challenge them by making the number bigger with the hit and the damage. So,
yeah, and that's a fair point too, because a lot of times when you're GMing, or if you want to make something tougher, you kind of have to do it on your own. So, and I know that's something that D&D was especially with the original 5th edition, struggled with it, because it seemed like at level 1, you're just super squishy, which you're supposed to be, But then when you get to a certain level, it seems like no matter what's thrown at you, there's always like it always seemed like it was easier for the players and characters to get out of whatever mess they were in.
And I mean, like, that's the thing too. If that's the design where it's like, you guys made it this far, congratulations, you get to do the cool stuff. I think that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
The bigger issue with 5th edition is the support past 11th level is not there.
Yeah, and I agree with that.
So like, even if you wanted to play high level characters where it's harder to kill them, that's fine. It's just, it was much more like sparse. You would have to come up with the stuff on your own. And even like, they would have monsters that could fit higher levels, but like, even then, like, and they've admitted like their monster balancer was broken. So it really didn't matter, because like, especially when you have one spell that can just stop one creature, that's when it gets insane. And yeah, you can have legendary resistances and stuff like that where you auto succeed, but like, even then, like, those seemed more like patches rather than bandaging a wound. It was like a band-aid.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I think 5th edition and even Pathfinder 2nd edition are solid additions.
Correct.
So then why are we having these new editions of them? I mean, Charles should probably ask that question.
So yeah, well, actually, that's a great question. Why are we having these new editions? If 5e and Pathfinder 2nd edition are just, maybe not the pinnacle, like why bother updating? Why bother updating a system?
Yeah. So money.
Money's the answer to most of these things. I get that.
No, well,
while jokingly, but also seriously.
I'm not gonna imply. Well, you can look at how Hasbro has been running Wizards of the Coast in the past like 2 years, and you can argue that it's about money for at least 5th edition. Without getting into too much of the weeds, because that's not what we're about. Again, 5th edition has been around since 2015. It's 2024. It's been almost 10 years. They usually look at getting a new edition. So if you're wanting, to make a new edition, because it's about that time, it's like it's been over 10 years. You're coming up on the 50th anniversary of your game. You're going to want to do something special, but you also recognize that, well, this edition is doing really good. And like, sure, there's some small problems, but not like any big problems that like we have to completely change the core mechanics of the game. The best thing you can do is kind of a 0.5 edition, which is what we got with 5th edition. 3rd edition to 3.5 does the same thing. And there's a reason people like 3.5. It actually like is a pretty solid system. It works pretty well. It is still really crunchy, so obviously not everyone's going to enjoy that part, but that's kind of why 5th edition is doing this. The reason Pathfinder is doing it is because legal things. Let's just say that Pathfinder had some copyright stuff that was taking away, that means they couldn't sell their game or had to give a lot of their money to another organization. And so they made a second edition in response to that.
Okay.
Which is funny because 5th edition announced that they're making a 2024 version before Pathfinder announced they're making a revised, I think is what, remastered version. And guess which one came out first? That's right, Pathfinder.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not saying this implies anything about the two companies and their what they're wanting, but the fact that Pathfinder was able to come up with 4 books before D&D came out with 1. I don't know. And their books are not like like D&D's new book is probably as big as one of Pathfinder's 4 books. Like it's pretty substantial.
Okay.
But ultimately, I would say neither of these are new additions because they're just streamlining the things, right?
Got it.
Pathfinder, Paizo took like the criticism of like which classes are weak. Okay, we're gonna buff them. And honestly, 5th edition did that too.
Yeah.
Wizards of the Coast was like, oh, monk's not that good. We'll make monk better. Oh, sorcerer's not that good. We'll make sorcerer better. Oh, ranger's not that good. We'll keep that one bad.
Sorry.
No, unfortunately, it isn't. Which they tried to work, and I've already heard of some interesting homebrew for that, which would be fun. So if you want to see. Like a deeper review of the new 5th edition rules, let us know and we'll do one.
Yeah,
but
for sure. Most of the reason why we come up with another edition's release is because money. To streamline it, to maybe alter some things that were either problematic or it didn't fit. So typically, I know you kind of mentioned it, like the process takes a while too.
Yes.
So if you already have kind of a base book, why do you think it takes so long to? Again, Dungeons and Dragons has been around the 70s, right?
50 years, yes.
So it's been around for a while. Why would it take them so long to come up with another edition? What do you imagine the holdup would be with that? Is it something to do with like, I don't know, licensing or what?
I wouldn't be surprised. With Hasbro taking over Wizards of the Coast, there is probably some idea of like, well, let's be smart about how we synergize this. If we have a new edition coming out, what other things can we have? What other merchandise can we have that coincides with that? Right. And so certain things might take longer because of that. Like ultimately, let's be honest, you could create a set of rules in one day and publish it the same day.
Oh, for sure.
And you have made a new edition. So like, that's not the thing we're talking about. Usually the biggest thing, the thing that takes the longest time is at what point do you stop supplementing the current edition and start working on the new edition?
Yeah.
And once that decision point has been made, you have to recognize like, okay, do we have enough books to supplement until that new book comes out? Or are we going to have to figure out something else out? On top of that, you have playtesters that are going to have to, work on it and find things that are broken that you might not have realized.
Yeah.
There's a lot that can go into that. And so it doesn't fully surprise me that a bigger corporation, it's going to take a lot more time because you have to go through a lot more channels and make sure everything's okay versus Paizo, whose sole thing is making Pathfinder.
Got it.
They can release a brand new edition and 4 books much quicker than Wizards of the Coast can. In fact, I think Paizo's already working on Starfinder 2nd edition.
I heard of that.
It's actually, it's basically taking Pathfinder 2nd edition and doing that, but in space.
Yeah.
Actually looks pretty good.
My thing is, why not just supplement stuff? Like, wouldn't it, couldn't that be a more beneficial?
Yeah, it could definitely be a different way to do it. The downside, of course, is now you're having to buy more books. So from a player perspective,
from a player perspective, for sure,
it sucks because it's like, oh, okay, so you want to play this game, you need to get the core rules because it has the rules you need, but then you need to get this supplementary book that fixes all of the problems with the core rules. And in actuality, you should probably not get that version. You should get another version. It can get a little confusing, like the fact that when people start playing 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, they're like, yeah, you can play 5th edition. And then if you really want the cool subclasses, you got to get the Xanathar's Guide. But if you really want to fix the issues with it, you got to get Tasha's. Yeah. And it's like, oh, cool. I'm $120 down. Yeah. That's great.
So, yeah, that was the thing I found interesting, too, was when I got into D&D, I didn't realize everything was not in one book. I was like, oh, there are supplemental books out there that you can get that add on to things, which are great, But I also, again, I appreciate new editions of things coming out because, like you said, it can fix a lot of the quote unquote problems that the previous editions had, and it allows. I think it also allows for some creative licensing too, with newer editions. Like I think it allows you to go maybe in multiple different directions.
Here's the thing too. We'll talk about other RPGs that have had multiple editions, because it's not just these two that we have in front of them. It's just those are the ones that I have books of, because I bought all the second edition Pathfinder books and then they released the remaster, and so I was like, oh cool, now I have all of these.
Now I have all of them.
Like Travelers had more than one edition, and again, it's to streamline or change the mechanics to make them better. Older editions of Traveler have it baked in where you can die in character creation, right?
Yeah,
like
beautiful.
And technically, in the newest edition of Traveler, in the newest edition, you can technically also die, but it's a lot harder than
more
it was.
Challenging.
Yeah. You can get trapped in prison though, so that's hilarious.
That's Travelers is a fascinating character creation system. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, if you're someone who struggles creating characters, just use if you go check out the Traveler system. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, and so like that's come out with a new edition where it's especially if you start to notice RPG trends tend to go in one direction or another. Like there was the huge area of like crunch was a really important thing. We're kind of coming on to like rules light games being a little more important. Yeah, I think games like Daggerheart are trying to find like a new middle ground. Yeah, we'll see if that's successful or not. It's going to be fascinating. Ultimately, the fiasco that happened with 5th edition, again, look up other videos for it, is going to breed a lot of new RPGs. I mean, I think so. I agree. If it wasn't for it, these groups that were making supplementary material would have just kept making supplementary material, probably even for this new edition. Yeah. But now we have Tales of the Valiant, we have Draw Steel, Daggerheart, we have Nimble 5e, which is DC 20, which some of those RPGs are basically taking the bones of 5th edition and making it its own thing, which I don't know. I have to see that if it works, but like some of them I've already looked into the rules and I'm like, I'd just rather play 5th edition. It feels more like a supplement than a completely new RPG. Yeah. And so that's a bit of a problem.
Yeah, and you still have a lot of these older players and or maybe not necessarily older players, people who just find an edition, they're able to get their hands on one and like, this is what I want to play. Yes. And you know, I know for a fact there are older gentlemen and that comments all the time about how like, I played D&D Advanced Dungeons and Dragons original 1.0, you know. I'm like, and that's cool. And like, and they've been playing this since it came out and they're still playing with the same group of friends. That's amazing. That's a rarity. Yes. It's hard enough to get people together for any game night whatsoever to play with the same friends. So like, it's nice to know that you always have the luxury of like, you don't have to buy a new edition, but you know, so what are you looking for in you know, your new editions?
Yeah, and that's ultimately a good point to take away. If you like a specific edition, stick with it.
Yeah, no one's forcing you to stop.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, like that's why you have people who are OSR people, old school Renaissance, who are like, that's how it was and that's how I want it to be. And those are the people who really enjoy like the going into the dungeons, kicking down the doors, killing the monsters, stealing the loot, and coming back. Yeah, that's not necessarily a style of play I am. And if you look at the most popular actual plays, and it makes sense also that like the most popular ones are more about RP and are more RP heavy than they are necessarily about.
Well, actual plays boil down to it's, you know, we watch TV shows and movies for entertainment. Okay. That's what they're doing. They're role playing characters. So when we're looking for content to watch, we're not just we don't necessarily, most of us don't want to just watch someone roll dice to see how awesomely they can hurt someone. We'd love to hear the way they describe it though. Yeah. Like we're really into like the poetry of it, but.
So I will say there's one more reason you might get a new edition of an RPG.
What's that?
It's a very rare reason, but it does happen. That being that the IP of the RPG gets transferred to a different company.
Yes, that's true.
So like, and I'm not talking about IP in the sense of like Star Wars or Marvel, where like it will get transferred. Those are in my opinion, those are just brand new RPGs because the system's completely different. Yeah. But sometimes you get an RPG that's an IP, like Deadlands, and it's its own weird thing, and then it becomes a different system because new people take it over and they want to do their own thing, own spin with it. Yeah. But they're keeping like the core concepts of it, where it's a weird west and like zombies are there, but then also it's like magic, but then also
Jonah
it's not.
Hex.
Yeah, it's kind of like Jonah Hex vibes. And then again, that IP gets taken and move elsewhere, and they're using that in a new system. So like Deadlands has been through several different editions, and it's currently being used by Savage Worlds as really? Like Savage Worlds is the base game. It's the generic system that Deadlands is then a setting on top of, rather than being its own thing.
Interesting. So they're using basically just the like the location,
the setting,
the world.
Yes,
Okay,
correct.
got it.
And so like that in a sense is why there's so many different editions of Deadlands. And honestly, like if you were to tell me like, oh, I can't play the new version because of this, and I'm like, sure, I gotta trust you on that. Like the new version of it doesn't have what is like an iconic mechanism. We talked about it last week.
Right.
It's the I want to cast magic. Okay, let's play a hand of poker before you can cast magic. It's a whole thing.
Yeah. No. Again, I'm a fan of the Ox Ventures. They were playing Deadlands, so I didn't get to watch all of it, unfortunately. But I knew there were elements that were interesting, like just slightly off. It would be kind of weird to have to play a poker game just to cast a spell, though.
Yeah, it does slow down the combat a little bit. Especially when you have more than one huckster.
Like it'd be cool if like that's how you built up like your mana or something like that. Like you're building up, stored spells. That's cool.
It would actually be more interesting if it was like you do something and you get a hand and then you're just choosing your hand. Like, okay, this is the hand I have, so I'm going to play it, and that's my action.
Yeah,
that'd be a little more interesting.
Yes, correct.
But yeah, so that's another reason. And then sometimes you also get like the weird stuff where like, hold for thunder. And then sometimes you get the weird things where like the Star Wars RPG, right? It was a Star Wars RPG. They made it into a generic role-playing system called the Genesis system.
Yep.
Very much the same game. And then they lose the rights because Fantasy Flight no longer does Star Wars stuff, kind of, not really. And so like they eventually become Edge Studios, and I think they're still supporting it, but like I think they're also possibly making a new edition. There's no rumors on that. That's just my own speculation. But a lot of the people who made that game are now working on the Brandon Sanderson RPG, the Cosmere RPG. And I was looking over it and I'm like, oh, I know that rule. Oh, that's clearly from like how they make classes is 100% how Star Wars makes classes, where it's like skill trees. And you can go into multiple skill trees and do stuff like that. Their death rules are basically Star Wars, except it's a little easier to kill a character than in the Star Wars one.
It's very hard to kill. It's very hard to kill a character in Star Wars.
This one's a little tougher. It's basically the same thing, except you roll a d20 instead of a d100, and it's for every critical injury you have, it's a -5, and if you get to a -6 or lower, then your character dies.
Oh, okay,
so it is a lot easier, but it's not like Star Wars where you need at least 5 critical injuries before you even have a chance of dying.
the Dungeons & Dragons ones come out. Is that in fact a new edition, or is it more?
They're not calling it a new edition.
Okay,
because
they've changed it.
Well, they're claiming that it's backwards compatible, and to some extent it is. They've changed like what level certain subclasses are at, so like you're gonna have to do some modification if you want certain subclasses in there.
I see.
What I will say is, it seems like everything that's in here they changed to some extent. Might be small, minor changes. Some of the things got debuffs. So like, Stunning Strike for the monk is worse. Technically,
really,
but I'm okay with stuff like that because it makes it to where like it's not. It makes it to where you have more variety. Now it's just not. Oh, I'm just gonna keep Stunning Strike every time. It's like nope, you can only do it once per turn. Okay, I got to do other things now. The Paladin Smite is no longer just like after I attack, I choose to add a smite. It's a bonus action to cast Divine Smite.
Oh, okay,
and like again, what's nice about it is it now forces Paladin players to have to cast other spells rather than just Divine Smite using your spell slots.
I mean, and a lot of times when you're playing with those type of player characters, that they'll do what's comfortable, and what's comfortable is doing again the most possible damage you can in as few amount of rolls as possible. So.
Yeah. Now I will say my issue with the current edition is, regardless of how much playtesting they've done, regardless of how much fine proofing they've done and editing they've done, they've already had to errata some stuff, and the game is not even technically out. The rules in the book that we have here is different than the rules on D&D Beyond, because people have pointed out like, well, the wording of this ability means that that's not how it works, and so they've already had to change some stuff. And to me that actually proves that it was rushed out. And I don't know. Sure. I don't know why it would be rushed out if that's the case, especially considering how long of a process they took. And they've had a process of, hey guys, here's our new edition. We're going to slowly feed you all ideas we're doing so we can just get your feedback for it. Yeah. I don't understand how some of these errors got through.
As someone who's, into writing some of that, and I'm in a writing type field, you have technical editors for these kind of things. You have editors that are supposed to catch these things, and if you're having your playtesters catch it, that means your editors missed it,
I would argue this is why you have playtesters, is because they're
for
going to
sure.
find the weird interactions you weren't thinking about.
Absolutely. That's
it's-
why you don't release something until
Right. It's just weird to me that it's like, okay, so were all your playtesters all internal? Like, did
Right.
you not? And especially considering they brought the book out early to a bunch of reviewers, and we're like, hey, we're gonna give you the book months in advance, like 3 months in advance, so you can start making videos on it. You would think that they would then say, by the way, if you notice anything, let us know so we can make final changes before the next print run comes out. But they didn't do that.
Have you been through this book yet?
Yeah, I have. I've enjoyed some of the changes. I would be interested to test it out. There's some things that I like. Our friend Zach Dunkerton doesn't like that certain, like, all the subclasses are now at the same level, regardless of class. And
I kind of like that though.
I do like it, and I also don't. I understand not liking it because, like,
Yeah.
the warlock, the cleric, the sorcerer, they need to get their subclasses at level 1 when the subclass is what determines, like,
Yeah.
their patron, their magic source, their, like, god that they're worshiping.
Yeah, it makes sense to do it that way.
Right. Even like the paladin, like, they get their powers from channeling an oath, but you don't get that oath till 3rd level. So, like, that kind of stuff is weird. And it's, again, like, I've got to read some of the playtest stuff when it was Unearthed Arcana. I liked the more vast changes they were going to make to stuff. Like, the warlock was going to be a completely different thing, and I was totally for it. But they decided to not go that way because they opened it up to the public. And, well, the public, let's be honest, the people who responded are really the feedback they got. So it wasn't necessarily to the whole public. It was to whoever was willing to give feedback to.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a weird thing there too, where it's like, you're making this new edition and you're saying it's publicly sourced, but it's really only sourced by the people who are willing to put in the time to look at it. And so, like, that's really only your super fans. It's not necessarily, but you're never going to do a perfectly publicly sourced thing. So
yeah, I think we've kind of touched on all the things we need to touch on today when it comes to. So my question, I guess, to our viewers is, what is a maybe an addition that you kind of like, didn't like? You know, tell us in the comments. Let us know about other editions that, you know, maybe some new ones that are coming out.
What's an RPG that when it got a new edition you actually thought it was better? Maybe there was an RPG that when it got a new edition you thought it was worse.
I was not kidnapped,
For legal reasons, he was not kidnapped,
but
we all know he was.
yeah.
Yep.
Stay witty.
Stay witty. Subscribe.